The story that I'm going to tell you today takes place during an era when there weren't any Aegis cruisers. There wasn't any satellite communications. There wasn't an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, so no air cover. It was just a war of 4 frigates and a Wainwright-type cruiser in the Gulf, conducting a mission that was directed by the president to guard convoys of ships going into the Persian Gulf to the Kuwait anchorage and coming out. And why was that? Well, because the Iranians and the Iraqis were randomly attacking ships. And in the 3 months before we arrived in the Gulf, they had actually attacked and hit 42 tankers or ships of various classes, and there was a need to protect shipping and to stop that from happening. So what's my purpose today? My purpose is to tell you the story of Samuel B. Roberts. And as people talk about the future and the present, I want to tell you the one thing that's most important is that the courage of sailors and the principles of leadership don't change. They don't change from 1940. They don't change in the 70s or the 80s, and they are certainly not any different today. So I hope that you will take away some things from this presentation. And if you take just one salient point home from this presentation, then I will achieve my goal. But the thing that I think is most important is for you to realize that at a minimum, training and developing teamwork in your crew, whether it be in a classroom, a trainer, or on the deck plates, can make a tremendous difference in the eventual outcome of events. And in the story of Samuel B. Roberts, it made the difference between life and death. Samuel B. Roberts, a pre-com crew, probably no different than any other crew that comes together, but I want to give you some of those demographics. The principal crew arrived in Norfolk, Virginia, and then we had a nucleus crew that went up to Bath, Maine, where the ship was being built by Bath Iron Works. And they were turning out FFGs very skillfully and very much ahead of schedule. So the rest of us joined all over the country. And so it was a very scattered situation as you tried to bring your crew together and get them indoctrinated in just how you wanted them to be. The crew was roughly 220, scattered all over the United States. Average age, 20 years old. They were from 41 states, so they had some varied views of the world as it stood and how things happened. We also had 19 Puerto Ricans, not Latinos, Puerto Ricans, that were assigned to the ship because the ship was supposed to be home ported in New York. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, one of the reasons was that we had 19 of them, 8 of them couldn't speak English, or just varied parts of English. Now, why is that important? Well, sometimes that can be very exciting. We trained them English in OJT, and one night we had a young fellow, Seaman Recruit Martinez, on the bridge, and he was very proud of the fact that he was now the phone talker on the bridge. And he was recording everything on the status board. And we were sailing down the east coast of the United States, and we ran into a fishing fleet, all made out of wood, no lights on. All of a sudden, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm in the rack, the lights go on, and the OD turns to the JOD and says, "Better call the captain." Unfortunately, Seaman Recruit Martinez, right behind the JOD, thinks the OD has told him to call me. Grabs the phone, and the conversation goes something like this. Captain, this is Seaman Martinez, and we're on the bridge, and you better come quick because there's the biggest goddamn collision you ever want to see, and we're right in the middle of it. So there's an issue here, all right? We're geographically dispersed, so getting your message out to your crew, not so easy. So you got to think about how you do it. Minimal experience. 67% of the crew had never been to sea. Never been to sea. And the only officer on board the ship who had ever been to sea on a gas turbine ship was me. And it was as a staff officer in both the Canadian Armed Forces and with Desron 36. So the first time you get underway with those variable pitch propellers and engines and you're a 1,200-pound steam guy, it's a little different. And you look around for help and there isn't any help. There's nobody else there. Varied education level, I think that's self-explanatory. 20 months to train. 20 months to bring everybody together, get them ready as a synergistic group, capable of fighting, making them understand what you want them to be, how you want to fight the ship. That 20 months turned into 16 because Ronald Reagan decided we need to go over and escort those ships in the Persian Gulf. And so actually 16 months to go from that scratch position to be ready to deploy and to go into a war zone. So how do we do that? And where does this match up with where you are today? As you read Navy Times and see some of the things you see, tradition and heritage, the overlying thing that we always preach. Where do you come from? Who is the ship named after? Was he a hero? Was he a distinguished individual? What other ships were named for him? Samuel B. Roberts, an incredibly distinguished name. Navy Cross winner at Guadalcanal. DE-413 at Leyte Gulf sacrificed itself to turn back the Japanese cruisers and battleships and save MacArthur's Landing. And then DE-834, a Gearing-class destroyer with 6 battle stars. Tremendous history, tremendous heritage, tremendous sense of purpose. When you wear that hat, you're walking in the footsteps of brave men. Don't disgrace anybody. Don't abandon your shipmate. He's the most important person you have. Constantly reinforcing that. Constantly reinforcing to be the best. Everybody had a goal. What did we want to be? We wanted to be the best ship in the Navy. You know, we were a frigate. They were building Aegis cruisers down the road. They had the nice desk, wood. I had a broken desk in my office with a book underneath one end, but it was okay. We used to go down and steal their coffee cups off the table and put frigate coffee cups on and say, hey, buy a frigate coffee cup. They're cheaper and you get more coffee in it. They weren't happy with that. So we all had a goal to be the best, and everybody had a role. And that role wasn't a singular role. It was a multi-purpose role. We intended to cross-train everybody to make sure that you could take other assignments on board the ship. Why? Well, Dave McComb told you, you're going to go fight in a battle. You're a frigate. You're going to get hit. Guy next to you might die. You better be able to step up and take his place. That was our constant role. Learn all the missions. Take a step further. Be proud of your ship. We had a process. What was the best way for people to learn? We built those little books to teach everybody the systems on the ship, damage control systems and engineering systems. I think it's commonplace now in the fleet, but back then they didn't have them. They could stick them in their back pocket, constantly quizzing, constantly testing. We didn't do anything that wasn't a competition, and there was always a prize. I used to give money to the chiefs, tell them to buy beer for all the shoring competitions we did, because I wanted the crew to think I was a little bit of a nut on shoring and damage control. I also told the chiefs I'd kill them if they ever told anybody that I was the one who gave the money for the beer. But the point was synergy, teamwork, and interaction. And the last thing was trust and confidence. I wanted them to trust me, and some people might take exception with this, but if we wore a gas mask for an hour in 100-degree weather, and everybody thought I was a little crazy about that, what's the hardest thing to do? It's not put the gas mask on. It's when you decide, when the hell do I take it off? Okay, you have a canary, it doesn't die, what do you do? I'd always walk around the ship with my gas mask 15 minutes more than everybody else. Why? Don't bitch at me. Anything I make you do, I do. And I instituted that with ship's company. One day we had a fire drill, didn't go so well. I walked in the wardroom and the officers were kind of making fun of some of the sailors on the ship. I thought that was interesting. So I told them all that the next fire drill was going to be conducted by them. And they boned it big time. And I had them back in the wardroom and I said, well, gee, isn't that interesting? Remember, if they fail, that's your fault. Your fault, not their fault. It's your responsibility to make them better. Well, they went out and the next fire drill they showed me, boy, they did a great job. But the crew understood now that they knew what they were doing, and it built that whole intensive synergy. They trusted them because they knew what they were doing. The most important thing was, I wanted my crew to know that I would never piss their lives away, that I cared about them, and I wanted them to feel that the most important thing that they did in the Navy, or they did in their lives for that 3 years, was to be on Samuel B. Roberts, that they would remember that for the rest of their lives. Now, I could stand up here and tell you all these stories about the best sailors that you ever had. And I had plenty of those, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you the story about the average sailor. Why? Because that's what the Navy's comprised of. The guys that come to work every day, work hard, and invariably the guys that save your life. That's this case. 3 names up there. The first one, James Ford, 32-year-old black man from Greensboro, North Carolina. Comes into the Navy, he wants to be an ice seaman. He's old. Nobody wants to approve his striker chit. It comes to me, Freeman, he is a very responsible guy, good leader, and he's also a Morgan Freeman type person who people listen to. He honestly wants to be an ice seaman. I approve his chit, and he moves on. Gary Jackson, affectionately call him Natty Bumpo, everyman, constantly overweight. Struggles with his DC quals, but works his ass off in both areas. He goes out and he runs every day, just can't get his weight down, constantly studies, barely passes all the DC tests, but what a great radioman, is there all the time, does his job, a typical sailor, a great sailor, good guy. Remember him. Last guy, Mike Tilley, and if you were in an academic environment, Mike Tilley gets an F. The first time I see Mike Tilley is in Bath, Maine. The shore patrol has brought him back. He has 3 ID cards that say he's 29 years old. Tilley looks about 15. Even the bartenders didn't like that, so the shore patrol brings him back. And I give him the standard presentation at Captain's Mast. I bust him, I fine him, I restrict him, I give him extra duty. And as I walk away from the mast case, my master chief of the command says, Captain, we should get rid of Tilley. We just should get rid of him. He's never going to fit in. And I can't bring myself to do it because I think he's a good guy, and I am certain that I have now given him the great leadership lecture and I will never see him again. Wrong. Okay. The second time I see Tilley is after the ship is commissioned, and we've gotten underway, and we've been very successful in a multitude of events. We've smoked Gitmo, we've shot missiles, we've shot down the targets, we've done everything we can do. We've had a great in-serve, and we're rewarded by the Navy sending us to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands for a surprise Liberty call. And so Tilley, who's been working great, and he's now got assigned to space on the ship, and it's immaculate, decides he's going to go to Blackbeard's castle to have a beer with some of his crew members, for his friends. Well, he's there, and he wants to go to the men's room, and there's a line outside the men's room, so Tilley decides he'll go out in those bushes, because those windows that are in front of the restaurant, well, they're all mirrors, aren't they? I think you know the rest of the story, as everybody sees Tilley, and he ends up before me again. The Master Chief of the Command, you're a tough audience, the Master Chief of the Command says, obviously, Captain, Tilley's going to embarrass the ship. You know, he isn't going to fit. Well, my point here is Tilley makes bad decisions, but he is a hell of a sailor and works very hard. I can't bring myself to throw him out of the Navy. And so I do all of the things that I've described before. I bust him again. I think this guy's never going to get promoted. And we move on. This irritates tremendously my Master Chief of the Command and my XO. And you'll hear about this later in the story. Any one of these 3 guys doesn't do their job on 14 April 1988, 220 men die. I'll say that again. Take any one of them out of the equation, the entire crew on that ship dies, because every one of them will do something that night that makes a critical difference that saves the ship. Never give up on anyone's intellect and capability or desire to succeed. Always give them an opportunity, certainly within reason, but judge their character by their performance, sometimes not by necessarily their decisions. Now, after a very successful, and I've cut a lot out of this presentation because of the timeline, but after a very successful workup and everything, we're informed that we're going to deploy 6 months early to the Persian Gulf. And so we head back to Newport, Rhode Island, and I divide the crew in half. And I send the first group off and say, you must be back on the 26th of December so as not to screw your shipmates. Don't do that. And then the second half can go because we're deploying on the 10th of January. Roger. First group goes. Who doesn't come back? Petty Officer Fireman Tilley. And now the XO is convinced, absolutely convinced, that Tilley is going to go. And so is the Master Chief. And he comes before me at mast. And I'm about to tell him that, Tilley, this just isn't working out, and it's time for you to go home, when Tilley gives me the Richard Gere speech from Officer and a Gentleman. I'm from West Virginia. I don't know my father. My mother drinks. My girlfriend ran away. My car broke down. My dog bit me. And I cannot bring myself to throw Tilley out of the Navy. As I'm leaving, but I do all of those magic things to him that you would think, and as I'm leaving mast, my XO walks up behind me, John Ackelberry, tremendous naval officer, and says, tell me something, honestly, does he have pictures of you with a dog or something? So, No. But this is a guy who works real hard, and trust me, as you can tell, has bad things happen and makes bad decisions. We deploy Persian Gulf, which you've all come to hear the story. Arriving in the Gulf, you have two assignments back in those days. Remember, 4 frigates, 1 cruiser. If you are a frigate, you're either in the northeastern part of the Gulf as the lead agent for the Iraqis coming across the beach. And for all of you who remember Desert Storm and they didn't come up to fight, trust me, back then, they came to fight. Sometimes flights of 7 to 9 Mirages, 2 Exocets on either wing. You remember what they did to Stark? They came. And they were very innovative. And sometimes they came and they had, several of them had AUX tanks on board. They refueled and went all the way down to the southeastern part of the Gulf and shot ships down there. They were serious and they were good. They were good. And we could talk to them, we could vector them off. But that's what that lead frigate did up there. Remember, no Aegis cruiser? So you're sitting up there without a 3D radar about 18 miles off the beach when these guys come across. Blinders and Badgers. That was the job up there. Halfway down the Gulf, you had another frigate, usually a cruiser down in the mid-Gulf. And then around the mouth of the Gulf, you had 2 or 3 ships that were conducting convoys and would bring them in. The convoy box was off of Masira. Ships would gather up there. Our direction when we got there, as given by the president, was to escort U.S. flag carriers. That was what it was. And we learned that there was about 13 different varieties of American flag, because the anchorage at Masira was usually clogged with ships. And when we got underway, ships that weren't American carriers, flying flags that had 7 stars and 4 stripes, would pull into the formation and it just wouldn't leave. And so you would end up escorting through the straits and on down that track line to the ports of call, all sorts of different ships. And quite frankly, none of the frigate commanders or ship commanders over there minded that. We knew that that wasn't our guidance, but we were happy to let them stick with us, but it wasn't our guidance or our task. The other part of the rules of engagement was rather clear. Because of all the attacks on the ships, we were told very carefully, do not take the first shot. Do not take the first shot, and do not start a war. But we've got to stop these guys from doing what they're doing. And the guidance to me from Admiral S was simply, when you get into the Gulf, we're going to detach you to work around the mouth of the Gulf, and we want you to work against the Iranian FFGs. We want you to be aggressive. We want you to get in their way. We want you to disturb them. And as on that previous slide that Dave McCone showed, don't take the first shot, but if one is taken, finish it. Do your job. And so I took that to be operate aggressively and reduce the number of attacks as best you can. Stay inside the rules of engagement, but do your job as well as you can. This was a standard convoy formation. That's Gas Prince. No, I'm sorry. That's Bridgestone, the lead ship up there, 500,000 deadweight tons. Bridgestone hit a mine actually on the first convoy through the Gulf a couple of years before we got there. It blew a sizable hole in the ship, but she steamed on at 500,000 deadweight tons. There's a destroyer in the mist behind that, and the press in the States was commenting that, gee, U.S. Navy destroyers fall in behind, you know, these tankers. Aren't they supposed to protect them? 500,000 deadweight tons, 13,000 tons, be serious. That was a smart move. We had very few minesweepers over there, and usually these convoys were led by 2 salvage boats or corporate tugs that were dragging netting or sweeping gear behind them. There weren't Q routes. People asked about Q routes. They just weren't Q routes, but we were doing the best we could. And so when you went on these convoys, having the largest ship in the formation as the lead dog, not a bad thing to do. The second ship in that line is Gas Princess, liquid gas carrier. Its explosion radius, 8 miles. So you know if I look at this picture that if you're in this convoy and he gets hit, you're not going to have a good day. The rest of them are pretty standard bill of fare. The average convoy was about 6 ships to 8 ships, depending on how many ships jumped in. So as we lead up to the mining of Roberts, we're been at sea 152 of 171 days deployed. Oh, going over there, we had 5 days in port, so make the count. We were pretty much at sea. This isn't a competition. I know a lot of you have stayed at sea just that long on other ships. It's fine. Just trying to set the stage and tell you how long we were out there. We always were alert for action 24/7. I told you about the Iraqis. We didn't see much of the Iranians. The F-4s and F-14s did not come over water very much. But we did see surface ship attacks constantly from the Iranians and occasionally from the Iraqis. The other threat, of course, was mines. And I've talked a little bit about the complex rules of engagement. Let me talk a little bit about the mines for those of you who haven't been there and haven't seen this. There were three things you saw. Number one, there were sheep carriers that every day carried about 5,000 sheep throughout the Gulf. And every morning, the owners of those ships would go around, pick up all the dead sheep and throw them over the side. After about 2 days, they floated very nicely to the surface and they looked like mines. The other thing is tankers would throw, or every ship over there would throw their trash bags over the side, black, and after a few days the gas would form in them and they'd float to the surface and look like mines. And then lastly, they were mines, which were sighted usually every 2 or 3 weeks. Somebody would see one floating somewhere. So you knew they were there and you constantly thought about that situation. It was one of the reasons why you always steamed around either at condition 3 or port and starboard with modified zebra always set. Hatches down, scuttles open, and ready for action. I've talked about the rules of engagement. Mine avoidance was key factor. One thing for all to know, you see these pictures, John Wayne gets out, shoots the mine with a rifle. Not a good thing to do. Because unless it blows up, you just sink it. It falls to the bottom and it's still alive and it's still down there, and there's always a chance it'll float back to the surface. So as we led up to the mining of Roberts, we had conducted 14 convoys, and Roberts had been the convoy commander. I had been for 11 of those convoys. U.S. flagged and others, as I described. Talked about the anti-ship operations and air attacks. Stark was always in our mind. For those of you that don't remember, Stark had been hit by 2 Exocet missiles about 9 months before we got over there. It had killed 36 people in the first few seconds of the attack. The crew was very, very much wary of that type of situation. And for commanding officers, I will tell you that your actions and your behavior, when you're running a CIC and you're running a command situation, your troops are watching you, because they were always saying, that's not going to happen here, is it, Captain? You're not going to let that happen to us. And there was a lot of situations where you really had to be very careful and never forget what the rule of engagement said, just because the crew was wary, but you also had responsibilities to follow. And the last thing was, and any of you have been over there, you constantly ran into people that are sitting on board oil rigs or out on platforms somewhere whose boats had broken down and nobody was coming to help them. So you had to pick them up, bring them into port, give them to the Crescent, the Red Cross agency, and rescue them. And this is a picture taken of one of the convoys we were on. We got jumped by 2 Iranian FFGs. And one came down from the north, and one came in from the west. The guidance was pretty clear. We had not established a cordon sanitaire, but we had made it very clear. If you close us inside of 10,000 yards, we're coming out to meet you. And we're coming out to meet you with a missile on the rail. And if you do something, and this was the guidance, if there was a hostile act against you, read, they're showing a missile and they lock up on you, it's time to go downtown. And we did that a number of times, and we did bring a missile on the rail. And for those aviators who think that surface skies aren't exciting and don't run at high speed, there was at least 5 times that we passed within 200 yards of an Iranian FFG with a relative speed of about 58 knots within 200 yards. And it was that type of a thing. Maneuvering to get in position, well, you can get the shot and he can't. One of the things they couldn't do is they couldn't shoot astern. All their launches were forward. And we knew when they could light off what they had. So we would try always to get in a position about 60 degrees on their stern and chase them. And once we got in there, they were really caught. They could outrun us, but they couldn't outmaneuver us. And that was something that we did. Was it effective? Remember I told you 42 attacks over a 3-month period. In the month before we got mined, or the 60 some odd day period before we got mined, there were only 7 attacks in the southeastern part of the Gulf. You make your own assumptions about it, but we did a pretty good job of shutting them down from doing what they wanted to do. This is a picture taken from one of the ships of us running one off that day. So, brings us to the mining of Samuel B. Roberts, April 14th, 1988. It's coming into early evening. We're heading southeast at 26 knots for an unrep with the El Paso. We're at 48% fuel on board, and we need gas. It's a clear afternoon, 15-knot wind. Visibility is about 10 miles. Mod zebra set throughout the ship. Hatches closed, scuttles open, as I said. We're split out. Condition 3, bow watch set. A fellow, Bobby Dixon from Detroit, Michigan, always volunteers to sit up in the bow because it's a great place to be and he doesn't have to stand bridge watches. He's up in the bow with his binoculars. He will later get a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his actions this day. When it's pinned on him by Admiral Crowell, I simply look at Admiral Crowell and said, I think you just signed his death warrant. He said, why is that? I said, because Bobby Gibson has no idea what you just gave him, and he's going to be in Norfolk, Virginia, and some Master Chief's going to say, son, come here, I want to talk to you about these awards you're wearing. So a very interesting situation. Our helo is preparing to turn up, or is actually turning up on deck. We have an Iranian frigate to the north, about 12 nautical miles, that's been with us for about 5 hours, kind of matching our speed, and an Iranian P-3 to the southeast at 40 nautical miles. We dropped off the 2 mine sweepers that we had at Bahrain, and we had just turned starboard and south off the Rashtam oil fields. I'm in my cabin, we're going 26 knots, and I'm complaining to the chief cook on the ship about too much spinach in the menu, because he's had it for 5 days. Now, he's a Boston Red Sox fan. There was another reason I was harassing him, being from the Bronx. But the one thing I want to point out here, and I talked to you about intertraining. Repair 5 was all engineers, like we always have. Repair 2 was almost like the Chinese bandits at LSU years ago. It was everybody on the ship manning up that would do every other thing that we could do on the ship. Repair 2 is manned by the chief cook, is the DC locker leader. It has postal clerks in it, it has IC men in it, it has radio men in it. It has no engineers. It has all of those other guys. And they are going to save the ship. They are going to be responsible. So we're heading south. The ship starts to shudder. My phone rings, and I go to the bridge. And as I walk onto the bridge, my initial reaction is, holy shit, those are mines. And in front of us, at about 600 yards to 800 yards, are those 2 mines. The picture down on the lower side is when the EOD team went into that minefield. That's one of the mines they found, and those numbers match the mines that were on the Iran jar. So clearly identified as Iranian mines. So we have 2 mines directly ahead of us, 600 to 800 yards, and 1 mine about 450 to 500 yards out the starboard bridge wing. Immediately called Combat East Force and reported that we had them where they were. And they said, Roger, don't get any closer than 1,600 yards. That was very helpful. We didn't know specifically what kind of mines they were, but on the off chance that they were acoustic mines, I didn't want to make a lot of noise and bring the crew to quarters with, general quarters alarm. So I got on the 1MC, and I fundamentally said, I think we're in a minefield. Not sure, but we got these 2. One on the starboard side. I can see my wake behind us. We're going to back out of here, but I want everybody to set general quarters, get up above the main deck, and report as fast as you can the condition. Mike Tilley, down in AMR 1, fundamentally says to himself, well, Navy's been good to me. Not real good at following orders anyway. I think I'll stay here because I got #1 diesel. Tilley now is responsible for AMR 1. You can eat off the deck down there. He's done a superb job. Everything works perfectly. He decides, maybe the ship needs me. It is probably the single most heroic act that saves the ship. Closes the hatch, dogs it down, reports in. Nobody really knows that Tilley's down in AMR 1. We button up the ship. This is our situation. The red dot you see is the mine that got us. When I'm talking to the crew, we're over it. It's underneath us the whole time. The 3 light circles of blue are the mines that we saw. And after the EOD team went through that minefield and picked them all out, that's the relative position they reported that everything was in the field. So that's our situation, and I start to back out of the minefield. And I'm eminently confident, because we had done this a million times in Gitmo, put the rudder hard port, put the APUs 30 degrees off the bow, and she'll back straight. So we start backing down the wake, and for about 25 or 30 minutes, it looks pretty good with the APUs running. And then probably the most catastrophic explosion that I have ever seen takes place. It lifted the ship up, and it wasn't like anything you've seen in the movies. It shattered us horizontally. It shattered and broke everything on the ship that was horizontal. It lifted the superstructure up back aft, separated it from the main deck, and brought it down and pancaked it. The flames were about 100 feet above the ship. No, we didn't measure it, but I was standing on the bridge and I had to lean back. I'm standing on the bridge wing, starboard side, 140 feet from the explosion. It broke my left foot. Broke a metatarsal bone in my foot. Ship came down. Bobby Gibson, the guy who saw the mines, is catapulted out of the bow position, does a complete somersault in the air, and lands in front of the missile launcher. Immediately gets up and runs to his damage control station. He has 3 broken vertebrae in his back. He's on station for about a half an hour. He collapses, and that's the purpose of his Purple Heart. Immediately, this 4,000-ton ship becomes a 6,000-ton ship. 2 weeks ago at MIT, the MIT students in the physics department said, no, actually you were a 6,300-ton ship. So we're in significant trouble. We've lost power, but we start to bring it back right away. So we have the ability to communicate. And I called Mideast Force and give them this first report. We're badly damaged. We're on fire, and I don't know exactly where. I'm not exactly sure what happened to us. We are sinking. We're settling. We can see it, but I don't know how rapid. The flooding is progressive. I think I've lost my main engine room. I think I've lost AMR 3, and I've got a report I've got flooding in AMR 2. On frigates, you lose 2 spaces, you can survive. You lose 3, game over. We were closing in on that. What I don't know the status of my crew. I'm mustering them, but I don't know where they are or how they're doing. Status of machinery, the main drainage system, my pressure right now is down to 70 psi. I can't generate foam. So I have fires in the main engine room and an AMR 3, and in the superstructure, I can't put them out. My combat systems, I'm trying to get power back so I can run around in the gun and see if I can fire. And then I'm going to light off my stir, but there's a crack through the superstructure that's hard to believe between the stir and the gun. So I can probably shoot, but I don't know if I can hit anything. But that's where I am on that. My status of the electrical grid and load, shaky. Shaky at best. Now, Tilly, cross-training. Making people learn other jobs that they're not suited for. Tilly goes in, #1 diesel, after the explosion, picks up sound-powered phones, calls CCS and says, hey, I'm up in AMR 1. Would you like this diesel on? I can't repeat what they said to him, but he immediately looked at the diesel. The governor on top of the diesel is fractured. So the diesel cannot be started remotely outside the space. Tilly has to climb on top of the diesel, open the 1,500 PSI bottle, drive air into that governor, and stick a screwdriver into it and force start that diesel. If it fails, there won't be much left of him. He climbs up on the diesel, he uses the EOSS card, he sets the whole diesel up, climbs up there, calls back, says, you sure you want this on the line? We're now 20 minutes into this and we're losing power. They say yes. This is what it sounds like. Bam! He starts the diesel. Climbs down off the diesel, uses the ES card, normalizes it, gets it running, stabilizes it. Then he walks into the space where the switchboard is, picks up, picks up the card there and calls back to CCS and says, now what do you want me to do? And they say, get the damn diesel power onto the switchboard. And he follows the EOCC card, or EOS card, lines up that switchboard, and that guy who's been at mass three times, but has been a good worker, waits till the oscilloscopes are all turning in a counterclockwise direction, reaches up and throws a switch and singularly saves Samuel B. Roberts. Brings power to the grid, which shoots to the main switchboard, and suddenly we get power. Now think about that, because I'll tell you where I was when this was all going on, because no one on the ship knows this is going on. Tilly's up there having a wonderful time all by himself. At 17:30, Admiral S has now arrived in his command post. He calls, and I report to him that I've completed my muster, and I have 6 or 7 very seriously burned guys, which is something to always remember. We trained at a lot of things. One thing we didn't train enough at was burns, and another thing was we didn't have enough burn ointment and stuff on the ship to take care of that many burns. But that's what we have, 6 serious, casualty count, about 40 some odd wounded, mostly lacerated and cut by fragments. Progressive flooding throughout the ship, and I'm working on it. GSK is holding, but AMR 2's in trouble. I'm still on fire and I can't get them out because I don't have enough pressure to generate foam. I'm sinking. I got power. I've run around. I can train my gun, and I've now told the Iranian, I think it's time for you to go away. Or words to that effect. This is our situation. Main engine room flooded. That's a rough representation of the hull. We did not know at this point we had no keel left. The keel was destroyed and the hull is 22 feet. The entire space is flooded. AMR 3, the space behind it, and I'll show you a picture of this, the shaft was moved at least 12 inches to the right. The flames blew through the shaft alley and came through, according to the petty officer that was in the space, like a lion. Blew the ladder off the space, ate a refrigeration unit, ate a dehydrator. He dove down underneath the deck plates, got out the escape scuttle. He said the flame roared through the space, and then the space completely flooded. So we've lost AMR 3 in the main engine room, and AMR 2 is a battle. We have smoke filled in the U-shaped passageway, and the fires are burning on the superstructure of the ship. And eerily, we're pouring water onto the fires. You can walk on the main deck and the fire's burning above you. So the ship is totally broken in two. You can literally stand under the fire and see it as the water is pouring down on top of you. It's a problem as we're creating some of our own problems. 1815, a sitrep to Admiral S. I've got 7 serious casualties. I'm badly damaged, but I've got the fires out in the main engine room, but I've done it with mist, not with foam, because I can't generate foam. And I'll just tell you one of the orders I gave that night that shows you I wasn't fully trained. At one point, because we couldn't generate foam, I said, hell, we got lots of extra stuff, just open up the canisters and throw it on. Let's see if it works. It didn't. So we went on to the next thing. We're flooded. The fires are out in AMR 3. AMR 2 is damaged, and I got to go take a look at it, but we're working that. The fires are contained in the module and the uptakes, but we can't get it out. But here's a real immediate problem. The temperatures in the magazines are now at 200 degrees. We have no cooling on the ship. It's all gone. So our problem is we got to get the ammunition out of the spaces. What's the bigger problem is we're carrying 200 Hellfire missiles. They're sitting on top of the torpedoes. This similar ammunition, but because we had special operations helicopters on board frequently, we had no other place to put those missiles. So they're in that space, and we got to get them out. We can train the gun, and we can probably shoot it, but the temperature in that magazine is climbing, so we got to start removing 76 millimeter rounds, except for selected ones in case we need them. We've cycled the missile. We have limited combat systems coming on the line. We've warned off the Iranian FFG and the P-3, and they appear to be leaving. We've set a mine danger zone 10 miles around the ship to keep everybody away in accordance with doctrine. And now our helo pilot has come back to me and said, Captain, I think we can fly this thing, because when the explosion took place, it knocked the helo off the line, and all sorts of fluid came out of it, and we thought it had ruptured its hydraulics, but it was just moisture. So our helo det, incredibly courageous and brave, pre-flighted the helo, got permission to turn it up. Remember, the flight deck is covered with smoke. There's no visibility back there, so they're doing this in the smoke-covered environment. They turn up the helo, and they report, we think we can fly it. I go down and I call Admiral S. And I said, Admiral, I have 7 severely wounded individuals. I got to get off the ship, and I need to know, and I'm turning up my helo to fly them away. What's the nearest ship I can send them to? And his response was, send them to Bahrain. Well, Bahrain at this point is 127 miles away. And I said, well, Bahrain's 127 miles away. Where's the nearest ship I can send them to? And he said, the nearest ship's 148 miles from you. You're in this alone, and you're going to have to do it by yourself. Have you considered abandoning ship? It's a question that people have asked for a long time. We're sinking at the rate of a foot every 15 minutes. We're on fire. The shark convention has now showed up. We have sea snakes in the water. The current's 4 knots. The wind is blowing at 14. I think I put my crew in the water, I'll lose half. I'm not going to do that. So I said no. I knew my crew. I believed in them. I think they believed in me. And I said no. I have not considered that. I think we can save her. He said, Roger. Do you have anything else to transmit? Ship's motto was no higher honor. I thought it was appropriate. I said, yeah, no higher honor, out. And at that point, I don't know what I don't know. There's a lot of things going on. I'm on fire, I'm sinking, I can't figure out how to stop this sinking, and I'm flooding. So what do I have to do? I got off the circuit, and I went down to do a tour of the ship. Left my XO on the bridge. I walked down into AMR 2, which I knew was the battle space that we had to save. And Petty Officer Jackson, remember Everyman, the radioman, the guy who couldn't pass his PFT and was overweight? He ran by me going into space. He has no clothes on, just his skivvies. And I had to say to him, Jackson, even now, you look terrible. And he looked at me like, give me a break, will you, Captain? And he runs down the ladder, and I went down behind him. When I got to the lower level, we're in water up to our knees. And none of the guys in the space, except for the chief cook, Kevin Ford, had any clothes on. And they had all gotten into the space. Remember, radioman, IC-man, postal clerk, and nobody related to engineering. There were 3 holes in that bulkhead that were the size of medicine balls with water pouring in. They immediately took all the toolboxes in the space, jammed them into the space, took off all of their clothes and dry patched them around it, and reduced the flooding by 90%. Then they started to use oakum because the bulkhead was fractured all the way across, and the water was pouring in. And they started to nail oakum into it to try to stop that flooding, but it got worse. So they knew there was water on the other side. So then they made the second smartest decision they'd ever made. They went to the chief's berthing compartment, stole all their mattresses and brought them down and started shoring up the space. I mean, you're a tough crowd. I thought that was pretty funny. Okay. Ford is down there, and the diesel, and we've already lost the diesel in AMR-3. We've lost one of the diesels in this space. It's totally destroyed. As you pour lube oil into it, it just comes out the bottom. The governor is shaky on the other diesel. That's what we were hanging on to, and the lights start to flicker. And at that moment, as the lights are flickering, I'm thinking, if those lights go out, we're done. All the pumps are gone, and all of a sudden the lights went on. That was the moment that Mike Tilley had just pulled that switch and put power to the switchboard. And the lights came on, and I literally said, I don't know how that happened, but thank God, let's see how we can save the ship. I turned and I looked at all of those sailors, and for people who say, young kids just don't measure up to the way they were in the past, let me tell you. I grabbed them all together and I said, very simply, you've got to save this space. You've got to save that bulkhead. If you don't, we're going down and you're going to die right here. I didn't say that to scare them. I said, listen, if you can't handle that and you're going to break, I need to know because I got to replace you. And they looked at me like, what's your problem? We're going to save this space. Don't worry about it. Now, when I left them and I started walking out of the space, I honestly didn't think I'd ever see any of them alive again. But as I stepped onto the ladder to leave the space, one of them put a boom box on top of a refrigeration unit and stuck in a journey tape as they started to work. Now, in and of itself, that's sort of significant, but the word on the ship was this. And you always know that the crew talks about you and says things. So this is the line. We all know that Captain Rinn fears no man. But what he really fears is that some night he'll come home and he'll find one of us in the driveway in a Trans Am with one of his daughters listening to a journey tape. And so I had to go back and say, hey, and they all turned around and I said, even now, your choice of music really sucks. And they all started to laugh. Now, maybe you don't think that's funny, but years later at the reunion, the guys down in that space said, when you did that, when you stopped and you made that joke, when you left the space, they said, we're going to be okay. The old man's joking around. It can't be that bad. Command presence, leadership, and the fact that they knew exactly where they stood was incredibly important. So Tilley now has energized power to the ship. Jackson has gone down and done the things that he's done. And I have a better idea of what's going on. This is what I see. This is a main engine room that 4.5 months earlier in an OPI got 100 for material readiness and cleanliness. The hoppum, which is stuck, and the pointer is not working, but that little thing that's sticking at the top of the space is the hoppum that was welded to the keel 26 feet below. It is now stuck in the overhead of the main engineering space. Only one person got trapped in this space. Chief Perez was trying to get out when we hit the mine. He was trapped under the deck plates in the water. We couldn't get him out, couldn't get the bolts done. Somebody went over, climbed over the debris to the left, stuck a battle lantern down in the water. Perez went under the water, swam 10 feet. They grabbed his hair, they pulled him out. He was burned over about 50% of his body, and he had a fractured vertebrae. He was a Purple Heart winner, and he was later evacuated. That's the movement of the main shaft and the explosion, and that's where the fire came through, and basically in the flooding and ate the space, filled the whole space in less than 90 seconds. You can see an example of the cracking. The fireball ate the stack, and this is a good example. You can see the crack. The entire superstructure was cracked in two. Across the top of the ship and down the starboard side. And this is the starboard side. The only thing holding the ship together, main deck. I-beam construction, a keel, and the main deck, all the strength members. The keel is gone, so the main deck is the only thing holding us together. And the MIT engineers that I talked to said they believe that what held the ship together also is the tensile strength of the steel on either side. Now that's HY80 steel, very thin. And this is a picture of the superstructure and what happened to it after the explosion. That separated from the main deck and came down and pancaked and landed and caused that. In the end, when we were going to Dubai, we had to use H-type and I-type shoring to hold it together because the ship started to work in the seaway and sounded like this, pop. And you could just hear it working back and forth. So we used shoring to hold that piece together. Our post-explosion situation. About 2 hours into the thing, we have 7 serious injured. I got to get them off. Our helicopter's lifted off with 4. We stripped it down so we could get 4 in it, and it flies away. 57 overall injuries. Main engine room is gone. AMR-3 is gone. AMR-2 is flooding. We're fighting the battle. We estimate 2,000 tons of water on the ship. Hull damage, we have a broken keel. We don't know that. We have a 22-foot hole in the side of the ship. We don't know that either. We do know the superstructure is fractured, and we know we have a badly flexed starboard side, and the interior of the ship is pretty badly damaged. Fires. The flames are still 100 feet above the ship, and we can't get them out. And the temps in the magazine are over 200 degrees, and they are rising. And as I talked about HY-80 steel, this is what the hull looked like and what the mine did to it. That's the hole right there. You can see the damage to the steel. This is the starboard side. The one lesson I want to talk to everybody about is you're in a leadership or command position. If the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff comes out at any point in time and puts his arm around you and says, son, nobody in Washington knows how bad this is. You've done a great thing for the Navy. What would you like to do? Don't say something stupid. I was in the dry dock with him. He looked physically upset about this. He asked me that question, and for some reason, I said, well, you know, Admiral, this is a very dangerous world we live in. I thought I'd go back to the States, buy a Burger King, and settle down. He didn't smile, and he didn't laugh, and later told Admiral Strasser he wasn't happy with that answer. And if you think they forget, flag officers forget, 2 years later, at a conference in New York, my brother, who was the chief, worked for NYNEX Corporation and a chief executive, saw Admiral Crow and went up to him and said, Admiral, I think you know my brother. My name's Greg Rinn. And Crow turned around and without hesitating said, Paul Rinn, the Burger King guy. So be very careful what you say to people in crucial situations. Admiral Crow and I talked about this after. It's okay, but it was okay. So that's our situation. And so at 1855, what we know is simply this. Our helo was launched with the 4 most serious guys, and they're on their way. The MER fires, we flashed, but we put them out. But again, we did it with mist and without foam. We can't get foam going. Fog of war. We figured out what was keeping the pressure down. We had a ruptured line. We had to close a valve. We took a petty officer, sent him out of CCS, and said, go close valve at such and such a station. On the way down the passageway, the senior chief, D. Seaman, passed him and said, Johnson, come with me. And he said, and he said, shut up, come with me. And took him off. And we went 20 minutes, not knowing what had happened. We thought the valve was closed, and we couldn't figure out why we couldn't get pressure up. And it was because somebody just got siphoned off that we didn't know. So always check your decisions, because they may not happen. We're still sinking. We're dewatering AMR-3 because we think we're saving the space and we don't know the damage, but it's not doing anything. We have no fresh water. All the fresh water has been destroyed on the ship, and at this point, the crew is literally sagging and running out of gas. And I gave the order to open up all the vending machines and get every piece of soda out of GSK and give it to the crew. During the JAG manual investigation after this, a doctor with the National Defense ribbon told me that I should have known that there was caffeine in those sodas, and eventually the crew would have been thirsty. Thank you. Okay. But at this point, we can cycle a missile and we can shoot it. I don't know how accurate we are, and we can shoot the gun. And in line of sight, I was comfortable that we could engage somebody if we had to. So I leave the Iranian frigate has now departed the pattern, so is the P-3. We're pretty much in this by ourselves. And in 1910, the mines are 400 yards to starboard. We can still see the 2 that are in front of us. We're settling. We're kind of drifted off the side. And I go down on the main deck, and I'm worried about where we are with regard to sinking, because we're fighting the fires dramatically and we're not winning the battle. And I called back to the flight deck, however. I'm standing on in the midships passageway on the main deck, and my shoes are filling with water. And I called back to the fantail and asked Petty Officer Sandel, who's a very serious black guy from North Carolina, who just retired as a Master Chief, but back then was a 3rd-class petty officer and was our point guard on our basketball team and our gospel choir and everything else, guy I could always count on. And I said, Petty Officer Sandel, where's the water with regard to the numbers? And he said, I don't know. I don't know, sir. And it was the only time that night that I lost my temper, and I said, I put you back there for a reason. And he said, sir. He said, the reason I can't tell you where the numbers are with regard to the water is the numbers are under the water. And I said, how bad is it? And he said, if I go back on the drop down and get down to my hands and knees, I think I can touch the water. we got about 3 feet of freeboard left. And so, as he's telling me this, and I'm standing there watching my shoes fill with water, and I looked up above me and I saw the flames, and I said, Stark, we're doing it to ourselves. We're pumping more water on the ship than we're pumping off. Dropped the phone, ran to the bridge, walked on the bridge, and gave the order, the time, whatever it was. Commanding officer orders the cessation of fighting all fires on the ship. As luck would have it, minor explosion takes place right at that moment. My XO reaches out, grabs my arm, bruises me, and asks me if I've lost my, mind. Can I see what's going on here? To which I told him that we had about 45 minutes to live. And if we didn't stop the sinking, it wouldn't matter anymore. Throw the 76 millimeter ammunition over the side. We had a helo engine, parts of it, throw it over the side, throw everything you can to lighten ship, get it over the side, forget the fires, let them burn, we got to save the ship. And so we started to do that. Violation of Navy doctrine? Absolutely. Decision at the right time? You damn well better believe it. We were in big trouble. We started to do that, and within about a half an hour, we stopped settling. And I felt that we had taken care of the problem. And so I thought, okay, we've stopped this problem. Now we just got to make sure. And at this point, I get a report from AMR2 that the water level in AMR2 is going down. The postal clerks are winning the battle. And we're saving the space. And it's now fully shored up, and we're holding our own. So I understand where we are. Fires are burning, and I go back to see how bad the fires are burning, and one of my DC dinks, a kid who couldn't pass his DC quals, but now has been #1 hosesman for about an hour and a half, and his shoes have melted off his feet twice, comes running by me to get his third pair of shoes. He stops, he looks at me, and he says, Captain, does this mean I'm DC qualified? It's a serious question. The answer is no. And he goes, shit, and goes on to his job. So, what's the point of all of this? In Ecklebury, I didn't tell you this, but when the mine hit the ship, and we got blown up, and the damn fiery debris was landing on the ship, coming down all around us, my XO walked up next to me and simply said these words, which he doesn't like to remember, and I always remind him of. Hey, Captain, remember your last promotion? And I said, John, what the hell does that have to do with anything? He said, well, looking at all of this, I'm pretty sure it was just that. So, the point of all this is critical situation, confidence. Show that you're not afraid. Show that you have confidence, and inspire your people. I'm not putting this on myself. Just inspire them to the fact that, yes, it's dangerous. We got it. We're in a dangerous business. March on, and let's get it done. And humor helps, trust me, it really helps. So, we're on fire, and I think I've got a realization. An H-46 shows up with tri-gates, Y-gates, and water. Terrific. So I go down to the flight deck, and we get all of the sailors that will go. I get 4 more sailors on the 46. I've got at least 6 guys that are lacerated, over half their body, they're bleeding. And I go up to them and say, listen, if we go down, it's a sharks convention. You're going to be a prime target. You need to go. Absolute refusal. Absolute refusal. Remember heritage and tradition? When I was standing on the midships passageway, a number of sailors went by and touched this plaque that we had made with the names of everybody that were on DE-413 that was sunk at Leyte Gulf. It was part of you're walking in the footsteps of brave men. And at first I thought it was just a coincidence. Then I realized it was more than that. That the sailors knew where they were. They knew what they were in, and they knew that they were bonding with the past. It was tremendously powerful. It was amazing. And to me, if somebody ever asked me, and I was asked a lot of times, how did you save Samuel B. Roberts? Tremendous courage of the sailors, discipline and leadership. But the courage of the sailors was remarkable because they understood who they were and what they represented and where everybody came from. Please don't ever forget that, how important it really is. So, with that all in mind, got some other reports. I thought we were winning the battle, but these damn mines were pretty close to us, and so I went back to the flight deck as the 46 was flying off. And as I walked back, and I remember I'd given the order to throw 76 millimeter rounds in the water, I'll ask you this question. I always ask this question. Nobody knows the answer. Do you think you have to tell the crew when you say throw the 76 millimeter rounds over the side to take them out of the canister before you throw them in the water? Answer, you should, because they're not going to, and the rounds are going to float. So when I walk on the flight deck, I walk up to the assistant damage control officer, who's standing on the starboard quarter. And there is a magnesium smoke float about 25 to 30 yards off the starboard quarter of the ship. And I said, Rob, what is that? And he said, sir, it's a magnesium smoke float. And I said, Ensign, amazing grasp of the obvious. Okay, why is it in the water? And he said, well, that H-46 that came in had a 200-gallon fuel bladder in it that they wanted to give us. And we said, don't you see what's going on here? So they said, okay, we'll just throw it in the water. And I thought you might like to know where it is. So I have a 200-gallon JP5 bladder somewhere out there in the water in the dark, a magnesium smoke float bobbing in the water near it. And as he's telling me this, out of the corner of my eye, what comes bobbing around the port quarter of the ship? The 76 millimeter ammunition that's still in the canisters. And I fundamentally said to myself, damn, this is not my best day in the Navy. Years later, a colleague of mine who we all know, John Langnick, actually said, actually, Paul, it was your best day in the Navy. So I realized that we had to get out of the minefield. I left the flight deck, I went to the bridge, asked everybody to step away from the chart table, and turned around about 5 or 6 minutes later and directed the APUs after checking with the engineers and seeing that we had enough power on the diesels and everything to run the APUs and not drag everything down and have the EPSI trip everything off the line, because we had no ability to start anything. We lose the diesels, we lose it all. I gave the OD the order to come to course 146, light off the APUs, and stay on that course until further notice. We did. We transited 23 miles on our APUs by ourselves. When they went back into that minefield and replaced all the mines that were there, we transited 146, and we passed between two mines up ahead of us that were 200 and some odd yards apart. So we're very fortunate. At several inquiries, I was asked how I came up with course 146, and I will tell you honestly, I have absolutely no recollection of what made me come to that course. But it did, and it worked. Our situation then was the fires are out in the main engine room now. Reflash watch is set. The smoke and the flames are still up above us, and we got to do something about it. And so my chief engineer, as I'm back up there trying to figure out what are we going to do with this fire as we're moving out of the minefield, my chief engineer pops out of his scuttle and says, Captain, I got the answer. Gordon Van Hook, great chief engineer. And I said, what's that? He said, we need to pop open the gas ejection ports because the fire is burning on about 5.5 feet of fuel that's in the modules, and we cannot put it out with what we got. We just can't get it all, and it's just moving around. So I really didn't want to do it because I was afraid of the chimney effect, and at this point, the crew is exhausted. And if we start losing the fire now, we will not be able to save the ship, and I'm very concerned about that. But Van Hook convinces me that that is the answer. So I give the direction to pull off one of the ports. All the tools for this are below the water in the main engine room. God bless sailors. They found a way to get all those bolts off in about 25 minutes. We got the crowbars in place and the applicators in place, and on the count of 3, we pushed the cover aside, and the flames jumped up and singed all of our eyebrows and our eyelashes. And Van Hook, very tactfully, was standing behind me, said these magic words, maybe we shouldn't have done this today. Maybe we should have waited until tomorrow. And I looked at him and he said, no, Captain, I'm only kidding. So it was the answer. We turned on the hoses. The fire went down. The smoke went from black to gray to white. And at that moment, we honestly said, I think we've saved it. I think we've saved ourselves, and we're on our way out of here, and I think we can make it. Now, it was a long way to Dubai. It's 120 miles. The next day, a salvage tug, after we had gone 24 miles, came. Divers went in the water, told us how big the hole was, told us we didn't have a keel, which we didn't know, hooked us up and took us the rest of the way to Dubai. Keys to saving Samuel B. Roberts. We accounted for the crew. My greatest feeling is never lost a man. Never lost a man. Brought them all home. Restored, and all went back to active duty except one. Restored main power on the ship, maintained power on the ship. Thank Tilly for that. We defended our ship, which was most important. I'm constantly asked, why didn't you abandon ship? I told you the one reason. Here's the real reason. Commanding officers don't get ships in the United States Navy to surrender them or lose them. They get them to fight them. And that's the reason we don't abandon the ship. I was prepared to stay with that ship to the death and not lose it, and I believe my crew was too. And that's what we're about. If you don't think so, go work for IBM. Maintain fire main pressure. Very, very important. Extinguish the fires, stop progressive flooding, stop the sinking, incredibly important, obviously. Treat the wounded in first aid. Really think about what you can face. I told you, burns were not really at the top of our list, and we really struggled with that. Get out of the minefield. We prevented ourselves from splitting in two, and we rallied the crew. Validation, we brought home everyone alive. I always told my officers, you're not your men's best friend. But if you bring them all home alive and in one piece, then you're their greatest friend, and it's never important that they know it. That's the key. We saved a ship that, based on everybody's assumptions, shouldn't have been saved. We successfully extinguished a catastrophic fire. We kept the ship together with wiring and shoring. I thought it was rather interesting, and somebody mentioned it today, that various people said, well, you know, that wiring didn't really save the ship. Really? Okay, thank you. And the shoring didn't do that much. We did it. We're glad we did it. We wrapped wire, the foul weather wire, all around the strength members of the ship. We turnbuckled it together. It held, and a lot of things popped. I believe it contributed dramatically. We were innovative because we understood the systems on the ship. Shipboard knowledge led to successful diversion from doctrine. Shipboard roles were interchangeable. Postal clerks, radiomen, winning the battle in AMR 2 because they knew what to do. And when Jackson was asked, how did you know what to do down there? He said, because I had done it 7 times before. It wasn't a big deal. I knew what to do. Practice, you heard earlier, practice, practice, practice. No substitute for it. Practice and make mistakes. Much better to make mistakes before the fact, not that night. We rig casualty power every month. Navy requires you to do it once a year and you don't have to energize it. We rigged it every month, and at least half of the time we energized it. The night of the mining, we brought power to parts of the ship by rigging casualty power in 28 minutes. Pretty convincing. Lastly, confidence. I think my crew was incredibly confident. They knew what they could do, and I think they were confident in their leadership, and I was incredibly confident in them. I had a tremendous degree of respect. When we got into Dubai, they put us in a 1 million deadweight ton dry dock. I'm showing you this picture because they took all the things out of the bottom of the ship, shipped them back to the States, and saved the government and the Navy lots of money. Admiral Nikos was telling me it was about $100 million to fix the ship. That's great. I really wish I didn't know that. But this picture means more to me than that. You see, I had a suggestion box on the ship, and Fireman Tilley wrote me a suggestion halfway through the deployment, and it went something like this: Captain, I'm in port and starboard, and the rest of us are down here, and we don't see the light of day during this deployment. Don't you think it'd be possible to put a porthole in the main engineering space? Master Chief wanted to kill him. I thought, it's Tilley. Come on, give it a break. So we're in the dry dock in Dubai, and I'm out sitting over where that yellow thing is, feeling very sorry for myself. One of the Navy's newest ships, one of the Navy's youngest captains. That's a lot of damage. This isn't good. And out of the corner of my eye, the Master Chief of the command is coming down the dry dock towards me with a piece of paper in his hand, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, you know. So I look and I said, Master Chief, what is it? And he said, Captain, it's that damn Tilley. Actually, he put some other adjectives on it too. And he handed me this piece of paper, and I opened it up, and it was from my suggestion box. And it says, to Captain Rinn, from Fireman Tilley. Captain, with regard to my request for a porthole in the main engineering space, you have exceeded my wildest dreams. Only a sailor in the United States Navy would think about that. There's a postscript on Tilley, by the way. My last official act, float the ship on board the heavy lift vessel and send it home. Get relieved by Commander John Towns, a great naval officer. It was a great transition. It was a very difficult thing to do. The crew all flew home, and that was a precursor, unfortunately, for coal. I think that was the first time a warship of that size was taken home to Newport, Rhode Island, and then on to Bath, Maine, where they fixed the ship very well. I've made some statements here, and you may say, well, how do you know that? David Taylor Model Base and modeled a ship 7 times. They invited me over to see the model. I was advised not to go. I went. I don't know what I was looking to see. But when I got there, they ran the model for me, and the ship sunk in 27 minutes. And I said, ooh, that's not good. And they said, oh, no, that's not bad. We've done this 7 times. The longest it stays afloat is 34. So a ship that couldn't be saved. I don't know. At MIT 3 weeks ago, I gave this presentation of a variation of it. And they have studied Samuel B. Roberts at MIT for 9 years in their physics department. And their estimation after that presentation was that Samuel B. Roberts actually weighed 6,300 tons after the mining. And they told me that physically speaking, the tensile strength in the steel below the main deck was probably what held the ship together. They're not sure, but they say, you know, quite honestly, physically speaking, there's no physical explanation for that ship to have stayed afloat. It should have gone to the bottom. So, take from this what you want. Where are they today? Petty Officer Ford. That night, every time I went by Petty Officer Ford, the ice seaman that nobody wanted to prove his shit, he was out on the flight deck running 5 P-250s. We had stolen a couple, so we had a lot. And we were dewatering hundreds or thousands of gallons of water from the space. So I said to the XO after we were in Dubai, God, there was a stroke of brilliance sending Ford to P-250 school, because running a P-250 for 20 minutes takes an act of God. He ran them all night. John Huckenberry looked at me and said, I don't think so. So I said, well, I'll find out. So I went down to the IC shop, and there was Ford fixing the phones that he had. And I said, Petty Officer Ford, how are you? Fine, Captain. By the way, when did we send you to P-250 school? And you ever see a kid who's get caught putting his hand in the candy jar? Ford said, well, Captain, you're going to find out eventually. But my page 4 of my service record says I'm a Class Bravo swimmer. I can't swim a lick. I went out there and I saw those sharks and those sea snakes. There was no damn way those pumps were going to stop running. Petty Officer Jackson, naked, AMR-2, every man. He and his wife run their own business in Greenville, North Carolina right now. Very successful, very happy. Retired after 20 years as a chief. Petty Officer Tilley. Now, you've all laughed at Tilley. You've heard all these stories. Petty Officer Tilley, actually, or Fireman Tilley, stayed in the Navy and made second-class petty officer. Obviously, because I wasn't his commanding officer anymore. But he got married. His wife said this is too dangerous an occupation. He got out and became, eventually, the general manager of the John Deere distributorship in Lewiston, Maine. And then, one day, a friend of his came in and said, hey, I'm going to Colorado. And he said, what you going to do out there? He said, well, I'm looking for a partner. You ever hear about wind turbines? You know those wind turbines? I'm thinking of getting into them. Would you like to come? And Mike Tilley said yes. And today, he's probably making more money than all of us in this room. But that's Mike Tilley. Roberts had a very high retention rate and great advancement. 34 crew members on that ship have achieved Chief Petty Officer rank, and 20 of those went on to be Master Chief Petty Officers in the Navy. 5 of my officers went on to command. Core values on the ship, not to be conflicted with our core values in the Navy. Responsibility, you're responsible for your own actions. Readiness, always be ready. Realization of your goals and your purpose on the ship. And constant respect, both up and down the chain of command, without any exception. And for everybody else, your beliefs and your behavior will be reflected back to you in the actions of your people. Last slide. Always remember that ordinary individuals can accomplish extraordinary feats if well led and trained and given a sense of focus and purpose. That's my presentation for the day. I hope you've gleaned one thought from it. I'll just leave you with one thought. I would love to be here and operational in the fleet, but my time is past. What you do is incredibly important to the country and to the Navy. If you can take 1 point from this, then I will achieve my purpose. And I hope that you will serve well, and I hope that you will perform well, and you will have the great luck and the opportunities that I had in the Navy. Good luck. God bless you. Thank you.